Welcome to The Bridge, a podcast for dental professionals featuring the insights and expertise of fellow dental professionals. Let's welcome our host, Stephen Kuza.
Good morning, Bridge Dental Podcast listeners. I'm here with Philip Cole. Phil, how you doing from KLAS Solutions?
Doing great.
Well, thanks for joining us today. It's Bridge Dental Podcast listeners' special episode today. We're talking practice transition, a little bit of consulting, everything dentists need to know about maybe some processes, etc. And I got Philip on to help us walk through it. His organization, he's going to tell you a little bit about it. I'm just excited to get you in here, Phil. You and I have known each other for a few years now. We've worked together. We've helped mutual clientele, build better practices, sell better practices. And so I'm excited to talk to you today. And I want you to start off, just give everybody an intro, where you're from, how you're doing, and tell us a little about the business model.
Yeah. So based out of Michigan, and started KLAS Solutions in 2015. Been in dental though for almost 25 years. It's getting real close. And was on the supply side, and then also got into the transition side, and then just decided that there was a few things that I still felt was missing on the business solution side. So I created KLAS Solutions. And so we're basically a solutions company for healthcare, dental, a little bit more dental specific though, because of my background, but we also do a lot of healthcare. But it's just, we have 4 pillars. So we do coaching, tax and accounting, transitions, and real estate. So just some of those, main pillars that I think that everybody knows that doctors, dentists for sure get nothing as far as education in school for. And so they come out as a small business owner and are expected to know stuff that they've never even seen before. So we're there to just try to help guide them and educate them.
Well, it's so funny because all of those things, I imagine each topic that you kind of rolled over, it has to do with one has to do with the other, right? So it's like, it might as well continue. We're consulting on it anyway. Might as well add it as a pillar of our core strength. And so I think that's cool. So go through the 4 again, though. What were the 4 again specifically?
So it's coaching, tax and accounting, transitions, and then real estate.
Okay.
And you are right, Steve. The reason why those pillars, it didn't start with all 4 pillars in the very beginning. A lot of those pillars evolved because of needing, that one of those pillars to help coincide with one of the other services that we offered. So it's evolved into that, but it's kind of one of those things where now I feel like from the day they graduate to the day that they retire, we have a solution for them and to help them.
Yeah. And you've seen that roadmap many times. So it only makes sense. So we're going to speak truths here on the podcast. Okay. So if you're a dentist listening in and Phil's going to speak some truth right now, I'm going to ask him about some truth. So Phil, where are dentists? It's kind of a 2-part question. So where's your entry point with most dentists? And it might be all 4 are equal, but where do you see the majority of your relationships start with dentists? Then where are dentists most reluctant maybe to talk about or get into or get feedback on it, I would almost say. And then not that you convince them, but you have to maybe go further into educating them on why they might need that help in that area. So I'd be curious to know that. Where is your entry point? And then where are you seeing the most reluctance maybe to dive into deep with dentists?
Yeah, I would say that, our 2 major entry points are coaching and transitions.
Okay.
But I also would say the 2 hardest or the hardest thing for these guys to grasp is those 2 as well.
Okay.
But I would say that now, out of anything, the age of the younger doctors over the course of the last 5 years or so, the younger doctors that are coming out of college and stuff, they're seeking way more help when it comes to the coaching side, I would say, than what the older baby boomers kind of doctors did, right? That was more of there's doctors that either believed in coaching or didn't believe in coaching. I think that the new generation is seeking the coaching more. I know one of our biggest ones are business ownership, because that is specific coaching just on running the business, and not worrying about the clinical aspect as much, but just running the business. And I think the other thing is transitions. But the pain point on that, once again, is too many guys are afraid to start talking transitions when they need to. And I know for a fact that you and I have run across that, with doctors. And so I would say that's the pain point, and that's the mistake that I think some of these guys, I would say majority of them do. They wait too long. And when they wait too long, it kind of hits them into a situation where they're forced to do certain things certain ways because they waited too long.
You know what? That kind of leads me into one of the questions I had today is like, when you see a new dentist purchasing a practice, we'll get to the other side of selling it. But when you see someone acquiring a practice, what are some of the bigger mistakes you've walked into, right? Because sometimes you're walking in after the fact. But what are some of the bigger mistakes? So if you're a new dentist, what should they be looking out for? Or what are mistakes you've seen when acquiring?
Yeah, I think the big one that I see is just not really getting a good handle on the practice itself and making sure that they're doing a deep dive on every little thing. I think that the problem I see a lot is there's so few practices out there for sale. That when the buyer gets one, they're not spending the time to look through everything and making sure that it's going to be what they want, but it's more or less a kind of, if I don't get this one, I don't know when's the next time I'm going to get one. I would say one of the biggest things though is just looking at the reports itself. I would say one of the biggest things that I see buyers make a mistake of that I don't think brokers ever, they're not going to give it to you. I would say when it comes to asking reports, you have to ask for it, but for a credits report, I don't see how many, I can't tell you how many times I've seen doctors buy a practice. And then once they get in there, they find out that, oh, wait a minute, there's all this money sitting on someone's account. And guess what? You bought the practice now. So those credits by law have to go back to the patient or have to be given for free. And so now all of a sudden you start working at one. I can tell you a quick story is we had a doctor that owned multiple practices and still never did a credits report. He's buying a $2.5 million practice. And I told him, I said, my opinion is you should run this credits report because there's just stuff in the other areas of these reports that I'm looking at, procedures by providers, different things like that just aren't meshing up. And so you should run a credits report. Oh, nope, I want this thing. And this gold mine. I'm going to take this thing from 2.5 to 5 mil, blah, 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 blah. Buys the practice. And then 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, he calls me, he says, I need your help. And I said, well, what do you want me to help with? He goes, I just ran a credits report and I found out there's $500,000 worth of credits.
Oh my gosh.
So just think, you paid 2.5 and your 500,000 of that is going to be free to the patients because you didn't run a credits report. So it's just little things like that. And I think every practice is unique. So I think it's just one of those case in point. We have a huge checklist for our buyers that you have to run through. And sometimes we have buyers say, man, this is intimidating. But for us, it's checking all those boxes, just to make sure that you can say, all right, I feel very confident on this.
There's a Harvard Business Review study, and this is one of the coaches I work with just brought this up, but he said 4 things people do to, that don't get the job done essentially. And one of them is a values mismatch. Sometimes there's just a values mismatch, maybe in the practice buying experience. There's a lack of self-efficacy. So maybe I just don't understand what I'm doing in that practice. I don't know how to run that business. Disruptive emotions, both for and against, right? You could be too excited or too conservative. And in this one, the example that you just described of the credits, that's an attribution error. And that's the 4th one the Harvard Business Review came out with, but attribution errors, like you just are marking up the wrong data here, and therefore you've overpaid for the practice, right? And nobody wants to overpay for it, even if you think it's a gold mine. So it could lead to just it could put you right behind the eight ball 2-3 weeks into the business, right? So
yeah, I mean, I think the other one of those other ones that you were talking about too is just the philosophy of the practice itself too, right? We have interview questions, make sure. But I don't know how many times we get buyers that, wait, I met the doctor, I talked to him, we're all set, we're good to go. And it's like, you cannot learn about a practice that quick.
right.
You can't make sure that you understand that what the philosophy is, how it's worked and stuff just by one meeting. So I think it's just those kind of things, is making sure that you spend the time and do the proper due diligence and make sure that this is the rest of your life. I mean, this is going to be your baby, right? For the next 30, 35, 40 years.
Yeah.
Don't make the mistake of walking into something that you now for the first 5 years have to do nothing but clean up to try to make it the way you want it, buy it the way you want it.
Matt, that's a great point of emphasis there. Let's buy it the way we want it. Let's not spend 5 years making it the way we want it.
Yeah.
Dude, we got your new tagline, Phil.
Yeah. I got to make sure I record that. So,
all right. What about, I think a big one that this is existing practice owners and probably new acquiring practice owners, just that transition to staff. But what type of coaching consulting are you doing with staff, and how have you seen that change over the last few years?
Well, I mean, before COVID, we're a big firm believers of being on site, right? And with coaching, once again, I think there's a big difference between consulting and coaching. So I make sure that everybody understands that we're coaches.
Okay.
But before COVID, on site was very big. When COVID hit, of course, we were shut down for 18 months, couldn't go into a practice and stuff. So virtual has taken over a little bit. So, we've had to adapt and go into that. But I think now we're back to, I would say that 90% of our coaching is back to on-site. And so when it comes to the coaching, we have two segments. We have the business ownership coaching, and then we have what I would consider, the front end or the practice coaching. And in that practice coaching, we have three pillars. There's team and leadership, there's business, and then there's clinical.
Okay.
And the business, when I say business, front end, front of the house business, where the team is up front and stuff like that.
Okay.
And so we just do an assessment. It's kind of what I call like your first oral exam going into a dentist. That's the best way to describe it. So we go over 125 KPIs of the practice, key performance indicators. And we give a 30 to 40 page report about every single aspect of team and leadership.
Okay.
We do surveys for the team. We do interviews of the team. We really drill down and make sure that they understand that everything is covered in that practice. And then what we do at the end is give them our findings in this report. But at the end, we also, if they would want to choose to do coaching with us, what our coaching layout is. So it's totally custom.
Okay.
I get asked all the time, well, how much is your coaching? And our coaching is custom. One could have, only need 4 days of coaching. We've had an office that was ready to go bankrupt and they needed 12 days of coaching.
Right.
So it just depends.
And do you find that exercise of surveying staff, finding out maybe what are people not saying to the owner, but maybe talking amongst themselves, right? Those triangle conversations. Do you find that's pretty common when you get in there?
It's very common. Okay. And I think the one thing that dentists don't realize is how much team and leadership is to a practice. I think it is it's such a missed. Doctors just feel a lot of times is like, I pay them well, they should just come in. And, especially nowadays with wages and doctors, I can't find hygienists, I can't find assistants. They want so much. But, when they, the ADA did a study, I think it was the ADA. I apologize if I'm wrong on that. But there's a study just 2 years ago And, doctors always say, they just want more money. They just want more money. And money was fifth on the list of what they're asking for. And one of the biggest things that they wanted was the number one thing, communication amongst the team, right? Not having the breakdown in the just the decisive, arguments and so forth. And so many times the team can get broken down from what's up front versus what is going on in the back.
Right.
And to get that cohesion. And then another one was basically I think the second one was to be noticed, as doing a good job. And I will tell you, in my almost 25 years of experience, I don't know. I can't tell you how many dentists I run across and sit there and say, I don't need to give them an attaboy. I pay them well enough. And so that is their attaboy. And it's like going at it the wrong way. So team and leadership, I will say right now, as far as coaching, is the number one thing that we get calls on.
What are some processes, and maybe it's the survey to get them started, right? But what are some processes that you think dentists can easily implement to kind of increase that communication? And I want to be careful here because there's a couple different points of communication. Dentists, especially younger dentists who take over practices, even a lot of the older dentists, however you want to describe that, just veteran dentists who've been in business for 10 plus years, they are still in growth mode. Because the business model is changing, dentists are taking on more implants, they're taking on more Invisalign case, right? There's all this cosmetic dentistry coming into play. So there's like this communication about growth. We're trying to grow, right?
Yep.
And then there's communication just amongst people and how to communicate. But I'm curious, what are maybe some easy things some teams can implement to at least get a baseline communication started?
Yeah. I will tell you right now, the biggest thing is vision, core values, and goals.
Wow.
Setting that. Because
people overlook that all the time. Like no one does it.
Because they don't think it's important. Like, I'm coming in here and of course I want this practice to grow, but, and in the day-to-day basis with technology and all the other things that come into dental, you still got the team. And if the team is rotating, right? So you've had 3 new people in the last 7 years and they just walk into something. Really all you're asking, say a hygienist to come in do then is just clean teeth. But there's so many things that hygienist could do for that. They're a goodwill, they're a producer. There's so much they could do for that practice if they just knew what the doctor was trying to accomplish. And yet there's not that. I would say, like, for example, goals purposes, I would say that very few doctor offices produce by a daily production goal. Instead, when we talk to them, it's like, hey, my schedule is just falling apart, or we're so backed up, and so forth. And then the first thing I ask is, are you having a goal set each day for production dollars? What's that? Why would I do that? I'm doing fine. I understand you're doing fine, but the stress of having bad days of just doing nothing but composites and you just don't want to do that, or you do a day of all endo and you're just worn out. You might be doing fine production wise, but that fatigue, that hatred for those kind of days, it drips down into the team, whether you like it or not. Yeah. You know what I mean? So the team always will be the one that sits there and says, oh yeah, I mean, he's going to hate us today, and so we just know, or she's going to be so upset with us today.
And everyone's on eggshells.
Yeah. And so then my thing is always, what people don't understand is with not having that vision, without having the core values and the goals, then it just starts to do like anything in natural sense, right? It's just going to keep compounding and it's going to get worse and going to get worse. And sometimes it may take 10 years, but it doesn't matter. At 10 years, something's going to erupt, Right. And so do you want to lose those people that have created such a great practice for you, or do you want to keep them? And all it is having, I just talked to a doctor down here in South Carolina where I'm at for the next 2 weeks doing some seminars. I don't believe in morning huddles. I don't need morning huddles. What do I need morning huddles for? Because it gets everybody on the same page. Just
Right.
as simple as that.
Right.
Everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what this day is going to be like. And everybody gets a chance to speak and ask questions for clarity to make sure things run smoothly.
Right.
But instead, if you don't, then guess what? It's chaos. And
Right.
chaos eventually wears people out.
Right, because we're just like tackling yesterday's to-do list, and all you end up doing is sitting in an email, answering questions. It's not good. And look, those things have to be done. Those tasks are required, but there's no purpose to the day. To your point, it's just a backfilled day.
Correct.
Which doesn't necessarily lead to purposeful work. Right? If you're just constantly task oriented, to your point, no vision that why we're doing what we're doing. And so I've been talking to some dentists lately, some veteran dentists, and to your point, production's down, losing staff, and these are like 10, 15, 20-year dentists who figured it out, right? They have the business model, the patient base, but there's something falling apart that maybe has just been over the years, starting to lose that control. And I would even say it could be more important for veteran dentists, because who knows, maybe they had the original mission vision, values, and core beliefs kind of initially when they bought the practice. 10, 15 years later, some of that stuff could fade. They've moved away from it. Maybe they have different beliefs, right? Do you see that?
And that's the problem. They don't revisit it, right?
Right.
I mean, that's something that I feel is something that you should revisit, every 5 years. Or take a team to a seminar that's a team in leadership, get everybody back on, focus, back on board. And like you said, you're absolutely right. What you're thinking when you buy a practice at 30 versus what your now life is at 45, if you have kids and you're going to sporting events and stuff like that, that's definitely one of those things where, guess what? My thought process on what I want my practice to be may have changed. But does everybody else know what you're doing, in your personal life, and does the rest of the team know your thoughts, or are they still drilled in on when you bought the practice at 30? A lot of things can change. Right.
And so I appreciate you sharing that. And I want to jump back into somewhat the practice acquisition side. So we talked about like what are some mistakes people, young dentists make when buying practices, et cetera. But what does describe as best you can, like what does a successful practice acquisition look like, whether it's from the seller side, the buyer side, or maybe just you could facilitate both those discussions. But what do you see? Is it a win-win situation all the time? And what do you see as a successful practice acquisition?
Yeah. So it's going to be where I'm going to probably do a little bit of a sales pitch for myself, and I apologize.
Well, that's okay. That's perfectly
but it's just a case in point of I always say that I'm a transition consultant. I am not a broker. I think there's a distinct difference between us and them. So
let's stop there for a second. I want people to hear that. So you're a transition consultant. You're not a broker. If someone, Phil, let's just say I'm a broker, you're a transition consultant. Tell me the difference and why does that matter?
So for a broker, in my opinion, once again, as a broker, you're somebody that's going out trying to get a listing and trying to get that listing set at its highest dollar and then get your commission. A lot of brokers don't even do their own valuations. They third party it out. And so when you third party it out to, let's say New Jersey, and you're from Oklahoma, do you feel as though New Jersey is really going to understand Oklahoma? Right.
I understand. Yeah.
So that's one of the big things. And then I think the other thing is a broker always depends on the buyer and the seller to go out. And one of the number one things that breaks a transition, negotiate, and they expect them to get their own team members put together, right? And then they hope that just tell me when it's all done and closing is going to happen and I'll get my commission.
I gotcha.
For us as a transition consultant, the difference with us is we have put all the processes in line. So so it is, I guess, if you want to say, a win-win. I know some people say, oh, so you do dual representation. No, we don't do dual representation. We do a transition process.
Right.
And so when we do our valuations are non-negotiable. They're fair. They're not going to be that where I feel brokers try to get that top dollar for someone. We're going into a fair price that's fair to the seller and fair to the buyer, where the buyer isn't going to have to worry about doing some special type of loan to get the practice,
right,
or they got to do certain things like this. They can buy the practice conventionally outright, and the seller is going to get the dollar amount that is absolutely good for him and fair for him or her. And then through that, then we go through and the whole process. We have worksheets that to fill out the APA. We have checklists. We follow through on all those checklists. We're running UCCs. We're doing the UA 127 forms and all that different, all those different things. We're talking to their CPAs and getting all the information that's needed to make sure that this transition, once again, follows a process.
Right.
And that process then is very simple, so that when it's, our whole goal is when the process is done, that you have a seller and a buyer that say that was smooth and that was easy and that was good. And so it's that kind of thing. And so when we find out what kind of a practice the seller has and so forth, another thing is we don't just bring any buyer. The buyer has to fit what the seller is looking to do with that transition. And if we have a buyer that doesn't match, then we don't introduce them. But a broker will sit there and say, hey, I got 10. Like we have a doctor right now that's in Michigan. And he said, I left the broker. I'm going to go with you guys. And he hands me this list of 30 buyers. And he said, well, this broker said that this is all the buyers he brought to me, but I only saw one of them. I only talked to one of them, but that's their idea of
what happened to the other 29.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just for us. We wouldn't have brought 29 to them because I guarantee you a 29 out of those wouldn't have fit the practice that he's trying to sell.
So it's more than just saying, hey, I'm going to list my practice for sale. I'm doing 3 million of total revenue. Like, you guys are getting more in depth. We're getting the paperwork. We're getting actual data. You mentioned the credits report and like when you're buying one, right? But these pieces are all integral to number one, knowing what type of practice you're buying, what can you afford to buy, and those things got to come together. And make for a way better negotiation, because it's logic. It's not what I think the business is worth, right? So I think you ground people there.
Yeah, we set that value because not only are we doing the valuation and we do a market comparison and we do fair market value, but we also bring in our coaching side of things, and we bring in 30 KPIs to make sure that we're setting what the potential is in this practice up. So we're setting the standard of knowing that, so that buyers, like, you're getting the practice that you're looking for. Seller, you're selling the practice that you wanted to sell. Right. And so that, just like I said, it eliminates that negotiation, and now we can go at it with full transparency. And that's one of the things that we tell both buyer and seller. If you don't want to be transparent, and if you were to, let's say the seller says, well, why do I got to run a credits report? And they might know that their credits are high, because that's transparency, right? We're not going back and forth and trying to see what we can hide from this guy and what can we hide from that, right? Because that's not a good transition. So once again, it's not a seller buyer thing. It's a transition thing. This is what, to make a good transition, needs to happen. And I would say the other big thing that is huge for us in that valuation is making sure that practice is ready to sell, and that the seller has done all of their due diligence. And you're one of those people that we always have to talk about, because right. We have one in Wisconsin right now that is a $3.5 million practice, and he wants to sell it a certain way. But his whole career has done his own investing. Mm-hmm. And now he's screwed, because we have one option for him, and it's the option that he likes the least. Right. or is one that he wanted to stay away from. But we have no choice. We
Right.
have no choice because the dollar, what he wants, and the only way to get it is a certain way. So that's why for us, those valuations are just gigantic for us. And that's hence the reason why we created a lifetime valuation. You get the valuation when you're 45, get it when you're 50, and we'll update it every year for you on your request. But now it gives you, Steve, and you got to say, it's really nice when you sit there and have someone say that my practice is worth $1 million, and you know it's worth $1 million.
Right. They're right. I see that on my end all the time. How do we value the practice in our, and I have to leverage professionals like you, Phil, and say, no, you should be doing this lifetime valuation. Let's actually put a quick asterisk there. So what's a lifetime valuation? So for those listening can kind of understand what that is.
So it's just what we'll do is we'll do a valuation on your practice as if you were going to sell it today.
Okay, so I'm even if I'm 38 years old, I'm a dentist. We're doing a couple million in revenue. We're trying to grow, and I'm not selling for 20 years. You guys will do it in that scenario for like if I was selling today, here's what the practice is worth.
Yep, here's what the practice is worth, and then every 12 months, we will. If you sit there and say, let's say they were working with you, and you said, "Hey, I want a updated value of your practice every 12 months," then every 12 months we'll give them the updated value.
Okay.
And then that way, all the different type of planning can happen.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's such a huge moment for people because if we just tie this into the retirement discussion for a moment, or eventually, maybe it's not retirement, maybe it's just a sale. But if we tie that together, the biggest anxiety I see from clients is the lack of clarity on the number. Yes. Hey, Steve, I've saved X. We have money here. We own a piece of real estate there, but I don't have any idea what the practice is worth. And I'm like, wow, you've been doing it for 20 years. That's a problem. Like we need to figure that out because we got to be able to plug in something and know at least at a minimum, if you get $1 million for your practice or 2 million, like we know how it fits into your plan going forward. But the lack of clarity is where a lot of their financial stress comes from.
And I think that one of the biggest mistakes too that doctors make is they listen to maybe their buddy that sold, or they listen to what DSOs are paying, and they think that they can get that on the empty market, but they don't understand, what games the DSOs play to get those values. I mean, it's kind of like the bank. If you go to the bank for your loan and everybody's at 7% and this bank's at 5.5%, do you honestly think that bank is just cheaper? They're making it up somewhere behind the scenes, right? And that's what a DSO does, because you can only do so much in a dental practice to make that gain or to get that money back that they just promised you.
Correct.
I think,
we'll touch on that, but I'll let you finish your point. But
no, I was just going to say, so that to me, the biggest thing is getting an accurate number so that you can base it off of. And now you also can do so much from it as far as growth. Like, okay, if you were to sit there and say, we really would like to see you at, instead of 800,000, really like to see the value of your practice be at 1 million. Okay, now what does it take to get 200,000? Not much.
Right.
It doesn't take much to get. Yeah. I mean, going in there, getting a couple of changes, and next thing you know, it's like I'm at 1.2 million, and you're going, hey, we're ahead of schedule. This is excellent. Now we can do this other thought process that we had, So I think that's huge.
Yeah, and let's draw a string for everybody listening. Like draw a string, right? Draw a string and tie these things all together, because we talked about staff communication. Mm-hmm. We talk about growth goals, right? And all these different things. So if the vision for the team is, hey guys, next year we're going to go from 800 to 1 million. We just got to book more patients, right? It's like, that's the only thing you think of, and put stress on everybody. Right. And it's like, no, actually all we need to do is book 5 more of these procedures per month, instead of packing in 20 more, hygiene, right? And, and stressing out the entire team for this incremental growth. When it's like, no, let's just focus on these 5 procedures. So that's the coaching and consulting that I think people just miss. It's incalculable it's priceless when you can get that type of consulting that can take a process from here to here. And like you said, go from 800 to $1 million. And the next thing you know, I'm at 1.2 and didn't stress the team out at the same time. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we have what's called a KPI management program where we'll download our proprietary software to their system and literally run the top 25 KPIs. So you have a good running practice, that's it, but you want to tweak that 100,000 or something. I mean, the software sits on there, and every month you get a coach that will tell you, like, here's a couple areas that need to be tweaked.
Yeah.
We're not, that the biggest thing I think that doctors get nervous is they think that, and maybe some other consulting companies do or something, they're going to come in and just tear my practice apart. I always tell a doctor when I'm talking to them one-on-one, everything that's running good, we congratulate you on. Things that need to be tweaked, we tweak. Things that are broken, we teach you how to fix them. That's it.
Yeah. I do think there is some of that, Phil, and I appreciate you saying that if I bring in a coach or a consultant, they're going to push me to grow extremely fast and, to the point to sell to a DSO. And these are some comments I've heard and a trend I've seen. Now, I don't think that's the case with all coaches. I'm just saying, I think that could be a perception.
I agree.
And so I appreciate you sharing that. It's more of like, no, this is process driven. What are your goals? What's your vision? If you don't have one, let's get one. And you guys help align those two things.
Yeah. I mean, make the practice what you want to make it. We're not there to try to create a Superman practice. We're there to create the practice that you want. And if that means you want an extra $50,000, but you're just struggling for that, then, if you want a more harmonious team, then we just do team coaching. We don't have to do the whole project to be able to sit there and say, hey, this is, we're now satisfied. It's a la carte. Maybe it may be a whole program. It depends on what you're looking for in that. So
yeah, that's one of the reasons I had you on. It's not always let's go from $1 million to $5 million in 2 years, just intensity. But
yeah.
All right, I want to wrap up with one more thought that I put a bookmark on earlier was we talked about DSOs, and that's always a hot topic in any discussion. But I have heard, this is a trend I have heard lately from dentists themselves. I don't necessarily have a comment on it one way or another. I'm just curious if you're seeing this trend, that dental practice acquisition for the private practice, selling to the young dentist, that it's becoming unaffordable for the young dentist. So the DSO route almost is a must. Or roll-up practice? Are you seeing that, or are you seeing that banks are still pretty well funding these practices? As long as they're worth it, they're funding them, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that's once again, I think that's just a misconception. And I think that, to be honest with you, DSOs have just a crap load of money, right? And so they can throw out whatever propaganda they want. And I think a lot of this comes from, it's that pressure salesman mentality. And I hate saying it, but I just don't like DSOs. I think that they're the used car salesman to me, kind of the industry. They throw that propaganda out. They get them, no different than in the state of Michigan. DSOs have kind of whittled out, right? They've come in and sucked the blood out of pretty much everybody. And there's only a few left in Michigan. Whereas in where I'm at right now in the Carolinas, that North Carolina just opened the state up to DSOs 2 years ago. So every DSO and their brothers down here right now. And so what are they doing? We're paying, 8, 10, 12 multiples. And that's what it was 5, 6 years ago in Michigan.
Right.
But ultimately said and done, you just can't keep that. You can't keep that up. Right. And so for those dentists that think that they got to sell to a DSO to be able to get their practice sold, I would say you're absolutely 100% false.
Okay.
Because
it's a false proxy. It's
a false proxy because we got in Charlotte, South Carolina right now, we're working with 2 people. I mean, banks are giving their practices are going for 110% value right now.
Yeah.
And banks are lending to those people.
I've seen that too. The bankers have never. Right? Yeah, the bankers have never told me they're not lending to private individuals. So
yeah, they're lending, and it just depends on where you are in the country, though, right? Because right now in the Carolinas, everybody's coming down here. Everybody wants to be down here. Everybody wants to own a practice. So of course the fair market value is going to go up. Whereas in Michigan, you're not going to get the 110% value because the practices, they're just not there. That's not where people want to live, unfortunately, as much. Right. So Florida's another one down. You go down there, and if you're not getting 110, 115% value, then, your practice just isn't running right. It's not producing right. But man, for anybody that's listening, do not feel as though you can't sell to a private practice. It's 100%. That's a false narrative.
Okay. And it's good to know, even if you are getting an offer from a DSO, understand it. Maybe work with your team or whatever. Is that a fair value? And what does that all entails? Right. So,
correct.
And to the point you just made on the Michigan side, what we've seen here, to your point, you and I, with the DSOs pulling out, a lot of owners lost equity. And so that's a big problem, right? And that doesn't happen when you sell it privately. The practice is sold; it's over. But with the DSO rollover equity, and I'm not trying to trample on DSOs. What I'm saying, but there is risk, and I think sometimes the misconception is that there is no risk. But when you have rollover equity and the DSO is running the organization, you gave up. You now have the risk of them eliminating equity because they can't get the values anymore. So that's a real risk, right?
100%. And I will tell you, I was just out in New York, up in the Albany area. And what is one of the things that the doctor that I'm working with, what is one of the things that he said is, yeah, this is just heavily DSO populated, but a bunch of people that bought into this DSO, they just went bankrupt. And so they lost all this equity, and exactly what you're talking about. So all these doctors bought into this thing under the pretenses that they're going to make X amount of money more because they're buying into this thing, and boom, they got waxed. So
well, I appreciate. First of all, I just appreciate you giving some insight into it, because there's only so much I can provide. I don't transition practices. You've seen it more, so I hear about trends. I can see some trends, but you're nitty gritty more in the transit. I'm usually on the back end or front end of them, but so I appreciate you sharing that insight. And today you've provided a lot of value. I think in a short amount of time, we could probably talk another hour on this stuff.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So, Phil, what are some good entry points for you if someone's listening to this, or they're a couple different I would say Bridge Dental podcast listeners? There's the young dentist who's looking to buy a practice, right? The associate. Then we have a veteran dentist who might be selling in the next 10 years. But who are the right type of clients for you guys, and who should check you guys out? What's that look like?
Yeah, for me, it's just, I think it's comes back down to the same thing as it's anybody really. I mean, it's what's your pain point, and what do you want to do, and take that and just give us a call, and we just want to have a free consultation. We'll talk with you. We'll find out what you're looking for, what you're trying to see. And once again, educate you if that's all it needs to be. But if not, if it's something that we can help you with, then we'll give you that option and see where you want to go with it.
And so if you're listening right now, one of the main things I recommend, and I try to keep most things general on this podcast, but the one thing that Phil said, if you're listening here, that I think was one of the most important things, if you have to put together mission, vision, values for your firm. And if you don't know how to do it, read a book, or if you need help, get started with Phil's team or someone like Phil, because it's crucial to set the compass for the practice, right? So I just think it's such an important thing. And I know, Phil, that you guys can help them out with that too and start to guide them.
Yeah, absolutely. So they can talk to our team and leadership coach, Ryan Hill, but we can also, we got videos that are going to be on our website coming in 2024 that are specifically going over those types of situations and stuff that they can just watch the video as well, if that's what they prefer. So I just want to make sure, once again, that I emphasize that we want to educate. And so we're not out there we're not going to force you into anything. We're trying to give you options and learn the way you want to learn. But our big thing is just let's talk, let's have a conversation, and let's educate as best we can. And then if we can help, because you need that, we can show that you need that help, and it's not just a conversation, then let's go for it from there.
Phil, and I'll put this in the show notes too, but how do people get in touch with you?
So the best way is www.KLAS Solutions, and KLAS is KLAS Solutions.com. I will give you my cell phone number out. I have no problem with that. That's 989-233-4200. Or they can also go to info@KLASSolutions.com. One way or the other, whatever's the easiest for you guys or for the listeners, and then we'll reach out and we'll have that conversation.
Beautiful. Well, this has been fun today. Thank you for jumping on. For all the Bridge Dental podcast listeners, that was Philip Cole from KLAS Solutions, KLAS. Check out his team. It's a free consult. They do an unbelievable job. I've worked with mutual clientele with them, and they're always satisfied. So, Phil, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Absolutely appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Bridge Dental podcast listeners, hope you enjoyed this episode. And this one will come out in the next couple of weeks. We'll be running into Halloween season. This is Steve Kuza, your resident financial advisor for dentists, and hope everyone has a great day. Take care.